The office door swung open, and in 3 short days before $99,000 would hit my account, a hasty decision by the CEO's mistress didn't just sever my career. It triggered the collapse of a $220 million deal within 48 hours. They thought I'd crumble, beg, maybe even cry. Instead, I let the truth do what truth does best: destroy those who ignore it. 17 years of building their empire, and they handed me the perfect weapon without even knowing it existed. My name is Claire Donovan, and until 3 days ago, I was the senior systems architect at Northbridge Technologies, the invisible backbone that kept their entire digital infrastructure from collapsing into chaos. 38 years old, 17 years with the company, and exactly 72 hours away from a $99,000 performance bonus that would trigger something far more valuable than money. The termination came on a Tuesday morning at 10:30. I remember because I'd just finished deploying a critical security patch that had kept me in the office until 3 in the morning. My eyes were still burning from screen glare when Madeline Cross walked into my office, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Madeline wasn't supposed to be there. She held no official position at Northbridge, drew no salary, attended no board meetings. Her only credential was warming the CEO's bed and whispering poison in his ear during their post-coital conversations. But in the twisted ecosystem of corporate power, that was enough to make her dangerous. "We're letting you go," she announced, not even bothering to sit down. She stood there in her designer suit, probably worth more than most employees' monthly salary, holding a manila folder like it was a weapon. Effective immediately. I looked up from my monitors, 3 screens still displaying the successful deployment logs from last night's work. I asked, knowing full well the CEO was in Tokyo for the week, finalizing details for the Trident Data Group acquisition, the $220 million deal that my encryption protocols made possible. "The company has decided to move in a different direction," she said, placing the folder on my desk with deliberate slowness. "Your severance package is generous, 3 months' pay, continued health benefits through the quarter. All you need to do is sign." I opened the folder, scanning the termination agreement, standard corporate language designed to protect them, not me, but buried in subsection 7, paragraph 4, was the detail that made me suppress a smile. The termination date was listed as today, exactly 72 hours before my annual bonus vesting date. They didn't know about the founder's clause. Edward Lane, the company's late founder and my mentor, had built a fail-safe into the original incorporation documents. Any core technical staff member who reached their bonus vesting date would automatically receive full ownership rights to any proprietary code they'd developed. It was his way of protecting the true builders from the vultures in suits. "Is there a reason?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral while my mind calculated the implications. Without my authorization codes, without the proprietary encryption framework I'd built from scratch, Northbridge would lose their certification status. The Trident deal required that certification. Madeline's lips curved into what she probably thought was a triumphant smile. "The company doesn't require a reason, but if you must know, your role has become redundant. We found someone younger, more adaptable." Younger, more adaptable. Code words for someone who won't challenge my influence and someone who doesn't make me feel intellectually inferior during meetings. I picked up the pen, watching her eyes light up with satisfaction. She thought she'd won. This woman who couldn't distinguish between a firewall and a firmware update, who once asked if we could download more RAM during a budget meeting, believed she'd successfully eliminated a threat to her shadow kingdom. "I'll need to transfer my access codes," I said, signing my name with deliberate strokes. "Protocol requires a 48-hour handover period for security clearances." "That won't be necessary," she said, snatching the folder back the moment I finished signing. "It will handle the transition. Security will escort you out in 15 minutes. Only take personal items." I nodded, began disconnecting my personal laptop from the docking station. She watched me pack with the intensity of a predator confirming its kill. She didn't notice when I palmed the USB drive from my drawer, not that it mattered. The drive was empty, a prop for what would come next. "Oh," I said, turning back as she reached the door. "You might want to review the intellectual property clauses in the founder's documentation. Section 12 is particularly interesting." She paused but didn't turn around. We have lawyers for that sort of thing. Yes, I agreed. You'll need them. As security arrived to escort me out, I took one last look at my office, the standing desk, where I'd solved countless critical problems. The whiteboard still covered with architectural diagrams for the Trident integration. The coffee-stained carpet from too many all-nighters. 17 years of my life reduced to a 15-minute supervised packing session. But as I walked through the lobby, past the wall of awards and recognition plaques bearing my name, I felt something Madeline Cross couldn't understand: the perfect calm that comes from knowing the exact moment your enemy's victory transforms into their destruction. 72 hours. The countdown had begun. 17 years. That's how long I'd been the silent guardian of Northbridge Technologies, watching it transform from a 12-person startup operating out of a converted warehouse to a billion-dollar fortress in the data security industry. I was employee number 7. Hired straight out of MIT by Edward Lane himself after he'd seen my doctoral thesis on quantum-resistant encryption protocols. The early days were nothing like the corporate theater I'd just been expelled from. We worked on folding tables from Costco, subsisted on ramen and Red Bull, and debugged code until our eyes bled. I remember the first major crisis, a complete system failure at 2:45 a.m. during our initial product launch. While the sales team panicked and the investors threatened to pull funding, I spent 19 straight hours rebuilding our entire authentication framework from scratch. We didn't just save the launch, we exceeded our first-year projections by 300%. Edward understood what we were building wasn't just software, it was trust, crystallized into code. He'd often work alongside us, his silver hair disheveled, coffee mug permanently attached to his hand. During one particularly brutal debugging session at 4 a.m., both of us exhausted beyond reason, he turned to me and said something I'd never forget. "Claire, the vultures will always circle when there's success to feed on. Promise me something, document everything you create, every line of code, every breakthrough, every innovation. Make sure your fingerprints are embedded so deep in this company's DNA that removing you would be like performing a heart transplant with a butter knife." That night, he showed me the founder's clause, written into the original incorporation documents. It was a poison pill disguised as an employee retention strategy. Any founding technical team member who remained with the company through their annual bonus vesting would receive automatic intellectual property rights to their contributions. The lawyers had fought him on it, called it corporate suicide. Edward called it justice. "The builders should own what they build," he'd said, sliding the document across his desk. "This protects you and everyone else who's pouring their soul into our code. As long as you stay until each vesting date, your creations remain yours to license back to the company. Leave before vesting, and the company keeps everything. It's fair, it's binding, and it's ironclad." I'd watched Edward fight cancer with the same stubbornness he'd applied to debugging. Even from his hospital bed, he was reviewing code, suggesting optimizations. The day before he died, he called me to his room at 3:15 p.m. His voice was barely a whisper, but his eyes remained sharp. "They'll come for you eventually," he said, his fingers weak but still gripping my hand. "The MBAs, the politicians, the climbers, they always resent the builders. When they do, remember the clause. It's your sword and shield." After Edward's death 2 years ago, everything changed. The new CEO, Richard Blackstone, was everything Edward wasn't: smooth, political, and completely dependent on others to understand the technology that made him rich. He brought in consultants who spoke in buzzwords, hired executives who measured productivity in meetings attended rather than problems solved. And then came Madeline. I'd trained an entire generation of engineers, watching proud kids fresh from college transform into architects of digital security. My encryption framework, dubbed Donovan's Lock by the team, became the industry standard, integrated into everything from banking systems to defense contracts. The Trident Data Group deal was built entirely on licensing my protocols. Their due diligence team had spent 3 months examining my code, calling it poetry and binary in their technical assessment. But none of that mattered to someone like Madeline Cross. To her, I was just an aging engineer with an intimidating resume and an annoying tendency to correct her during meetings. She couldn't understand that firing me wasn't like replacing an accountant or a marketing manager. She was removing the cornerstone from an arch, expecting the structure to somehow remain standing through sheer corporate will. The irony was delicious. They terminated me 72 hours before vesting to save $99,000 in bonus money. But that timing would trigger the founder's clause, automatically transferring ownership of the Donovan's Lock framework to me personally. Without it, Northbridge couldn't maintain their security certification. Without certification, the Trident deal would collapse. $220 million in acquisition funds would evaporate because Madeline wanted to flex her unofficial power and save what amounted to a rounding error in the company's quarterly budget. Standing in my empty apartment that first night after termination, surrounded by boxes of personal items from my office, I pulled out the original founder's documents Edward had given me. His signature was still bold and clear, a final testament to his belief in protecting builders from predators. In exactly 72 hours, his foresight would deliver the justice he'd always believed in. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and raised it to Edward's photo on my bookshelf. "You were right, old friend. They came for me. Now let's see if they survive what comes next." Madeline Cross was a masterclass in failing upward. Before she became the shadow queen of Northbridge Technologies, she'd been Madeline Stephanie Cross of Cross Communications, a PR firm that specialized in reputation management for tech companies. The firm collapsed after a spectacular miscalculation she'd advised a client to deny a data breach that had already been reported to federal regulators. The resulting scandal made her radioactive in the PR world, but it also put her in the perfect position to meet Richard Blackstone at a tech conference afterparty in Vegas. I'd watched their relationship evolve from the sidelines, the way you might observe a slow-motion car crash. First came the consulting contract for strategic communications, despite Northbridge already having a full PR department, then the overnight trips that mysteriously aligned with Richard's business travel. Finally, the inevitable Madeline's constant presence in the executive suite, offering opinions on everything from product development to personnel decisions. She was 43, with the kind of aggressive beauty that came from expensive procedures and religious gym attendance. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her nails manicured to surgical points, her wardrobe a rotating gallery of designer pieces that she wore like armor. But beneath the polished exterior was someone desperate to prove she belonged in rooms where everyone knew she didn't. I'd first crossed her radar during a board presentation about our security infrastructure. She'd interrupted my explanation of encryption key rotation to suggest we make it more user-friendly like Facebook. The room had gone silent. I'd calmly explained that military-grade security and social media ease of use were mutually exclusive concepts. The board members nodded. Richard shifted uncomfortably, and Madeline's eyes had locked onto mine with the kind of cold fury that promised retribution. From that moment, I became her project. She'd question my budget allocations in meetings where she had no official standing. She'd suggest junior team members could handle my responsibilities for professional development opportunities. She'd drop comments about institutional knowledge becoming institutional stagnation whenever my name came up. The other executives saw it happening but said nothing. Peter Grayson, the CFO, once pulled me aside after a particularly brutal meeting where Madeline had questioned whether we really needed so many senior engineers. "You know she's gunning for you," he'd said quietly. "I know. Richard listens to her, more than he should." "I know that too." "Maybe you should adapt, play the game a little." But that was the thing, I didn't play games. I built systems. I solved problems. I created value that could be measured in billions of dollars of secured transactions. Madeline created drama, manufactured crises that only she could solve, and whispered poison that sounded like strategy to a CEO who'd rather be golfing than understanding his own company's technology. Her fatal flaw was assuming everyone operated like her through emotion, manipulation, and power plays. She couldn't conceive that someone might simply be good at their job. Might have built safeguards not out of paranoia, but out of prudent engineering. In her world, employment contracts were weapons to control people. She never imagined they could be shields that protected the builders. The night she'd decided to fire me, she'd probably felt invincible. I could picture her in Richard's penthouse apartment, wine glass in hand, explaining how removing me would streamline operations and reduce redundancies. She'd have framed it as a power move, showing the old guard that new management meant new rules. Richard, distracted by her legs and desperate to seem decisive, would have agreed without asking the critical questions. Questions like, who actually owns the code that our entire business model depends on? Or, what happens if we terminate someone 3 days before their contractual vesting date? Or did anyone actually read Edward Lane's founder documents? Madeline's LinkedIn profile still listed her as Strategic Advisor at Northbridge Technologies, a title that appeared on no organizational chart, drew no official salary, yet somehow commanded more influence than most C-suite executives. She'd posted just yesterday about transforming corporate culture through decisive leadership and the courage to make hard personnel decisions. In 70 hours, she'd learned that there's a difference between hard decisions and stupid ones. Her greatest weakness was her complete ignorance of what Northbridge actually did. She saw us as a generic tech company, interchangeable with any startup that used terms like disruption and synergy. She didn't understand that our encryption framework was like a digital fingerprint, unique and irreplaceable. She didn't know that the Trident acquisition was contingent on maintaining our security certification, which required continuous control of our proprietary code. She certainly didn't know about the founder's clause, or that her timeline for my termination had activated it. In her mind, she'd won. She'd removed a rival, saved money, and demonstrated her influence over Richard. She was probably already planning her next move, perhaps targeting the CTO, or the head of product development. The empty USB drive I'd left behind would give her false confidence she'd assume it contained something important I'd tried to steal, reinforcing her narrative that I was a problem that needed solving. But Madeline Cross had just made the kind of mistake that business schools would someday teach. As a cautionary tale, she'd pulled the wrong thread, and now the entire fabric was about to unravel. The moment I signed that termination agreement, a legal mechanism as precise as any code I'd ever written began its execution. The founder's clause wasn't just a paragraph in a dusty contract, it was a smart bomb with a 72-hour fuse, and Madeline had just lit it. I spent the first evening after my termination in my home office, pulling up the original incorporation documents on my personal system. The language was beautiful in its simplicity, crafted by Edward's personal attorney who'd understood exactly what we were trying to protect. Section 12.3. Any technical staff member designated as foundational personnel shall, upon reaching their annual performance bonus vesting date, automatically receive full intellectual property rights to all code, systems, and frameworks they personally developed during their employment. This transfer is irrevocable and immediate upon the vesting timestamp. Section 12.3b. Should said personnel be terminated within 30 days prior to vesting, the transfer shall occur automatically at the original vesting date unless explicitly waived in writing by the employee. Section 12.3.c. The company maintains unlimited license to use said intellectual property as long as the creating employee remains in good standing. Termination for any reason other than criminal misconduct voids this license after a 72-hour transition period. The timestamp on my termination was Tuesday, 10:30 a.m. My vesting date was Friday, 10:30 a.m., in exactly 72 hours. Every line of the Donovan's Lock framework, over 2 million lines of code that formed the backbone of Northbridge's entire security infrastructure, would legally become my personal property. But here's where it got interesting. The Trident Data Group acquisition was scheduled to close the following Monday. Their due diligence had confirmed that Northbridge owned all necessary intellectual property for their security framework. The purchase agreement specifically stated that any material change in IP ownership would void the deal, triggering a $50 million breakup fee that Northbridge would have to pay. I pulled up the technical architecture documents, reviewing what would soon be mine. The encryption framework wasn't just a product, it was woven into every system Northbridge operated: their client databases, their internal communications, their financial systems, even their email servers all depended on my code. Without a valid license, they couldn't legally operate any of it. The beautiful irony was that I'd designed it this way for security, not revenge. Making the encryption integral to every system prevented partial breaches if one component was compromised. The entire framework would lock down. I'd never imagined that the compromise would come from within, from a woman who thought technology was just expensive magic that smart people performed in basement offices. I opened my laptop and set up a simple countdown timer on my personal server. Then I composed an email, scheduled to send at exactly 10:31 a.m. on Friday. To Legal Department, Trident Data Group, Rematerial Change in IP Ownership, Northbridge Technologies. This letter serves as formal notice that as of 10:30 a.m. EST today, ownership of the Donovan's Lock encryption framework has transferred from Northbridge Technologies to Claire Donovan, myself, per Section 12.3 of Northbridge's incorporation documents. Northbridge no longer possesses valid licensing for this technology, which your technical assessment identified as critical and irreplaceable to their operations. All documentation proving this transfer is attached. Regards, Claire Donovan, owner, Donovan's Lock Framework. I didn't threaten, I didn't negotiate. I simply stated facts that lawyers would understand with crystalline clarity. The USB drive I'd left on my desk was a calculated piece of theater, empty, worthless. But Madeline would assume it contained stolen data. She'd probably already had IT forensics analyzing it, finding nothing but seeing ghosts in the empty space. She'd interpret it as a failed attempt at corporate espionage, reinforcing her narrative that she'd fired me just in time. She wouldn't think to check the incorporation documents. People like her never read the fine print they assumed rules were for other people. My phone had been buzzing with messages from former colleagues. Careful texts, expressing shock and offering references. I didn't respond. Let them think I was devastated, planning my next career move. The fewer people who knew about the countdown, the better. This wasn't about public humiliation or vindictive satisfaction. This was about letting consequences unfold naturally from actions taken in ignorance and arrogance. I'd even disabled my LinkedIn profile. Knowing Madeline would check to see if I was job hunting, let her think I was too demoralized to immediately bounce back. Let her spend the next 3 days congratulating herself on a decisive victory while the timer counted down to her professional destruction. The incorporation documents had one more beautiful detail. Section 12.3. D specified that any attempt to reverse or legally challenge the IP transfer would immediately trigger a forensic audit of all company decisions related to the terminated employee. Every email, every document, every communication would become part of the legal record. Madeline's unofficial position, her influence over Richard, the actual reason for my termination, it would all be exposed in discovery. As I closed my laptop that first night, I thought about Edward's chessboard, the one he kept in his office for thinking through complex problems. He'd taught me that the best moves were the ones your opponent didn't see until it was too late to respond. Madeline had taken my queen, my job, my immediate income, my professional standing at Northbridge. But she hadn't noticed that in doing so, she'd moved her king into checkmate. 67 hours remaining. The beautiful thing about automated systems is they don't care about office politics or power plays. They simply execute their instructions with perfect, implacable precision. Wednesday passed in calculated silence. I turned off my phone, ignored my email, and let the world think Claire Donovan had vanished into the shock of sudden termination. Meanwhile, Madeline was likely strutting through the Northbridge offices, her confidence growing with each hour that passed without incident. I knew her type. She'd be checking everything: my company accounts frozen, my building access revoked, my corporate email suspended. She'd probably even had security review footage of my exit, looking for signs of sabotage or theft. The empty USB drive would be her trophy, proof that she'd caught me attempting something nefarious. She'd spin a story about preventing corporate espionage, adding another victory to her invisible resume. By Thursday morning, with 34 hours left on my countdown, I decided to add one small element to the plan, not out of malice, but to ensure the lesson would be remembered. I logged into my personal GitHub account completely legal, entirely mine, and created a new private repository called Donovan's Lock Personal Archive. I uploaded nothing to it, just created the empty repository with a README file that said, Proprietary Encryption Framework, Copyright Claire Donovan, Licensing Inquiries Contact Directly. Then I made sure to generate activity logs that would show I'd been organizing my personal projects and updating my portfolio. If anyone was watching and knowing Madeline's paranoia, they'd see exactly what they expected a terminated employee preparing for job interviews. What they wouldn't see was the automated email sitting in my scheduled folder, the legal documentation attached, The corporate bomb that would detonate in 32 hours. I'd even set up a second email to send to myself at 10:35 a.m. on Friday. A simple message, IP transfer complete, all documentation secured. That evening, I allowed myself one public appearance. I went to Castellano's, the Italian restaurant where Northbridge folks often had lunch meetings. I sat alone at the bar, ordered a modest glass of house wine and a Caesar salad. I looked appropriately subdued, professional but defeated. The bartender, who knew me from years of company celebrations, offered sympathetic small talk. I gave him tired smiles and vague responses about exploring options and taking some time to consider next steps. Jennifer Martinez from product development was there with her team. She saw me, started to come over, then caught someone's eye, probably her manager's, and turned away. But not before I saw the conflict in her face. They'd been warned not to associate with me. Madeline's influence or just standard corporate cowardice, it didn't matter. What mattered was that 3 tables over, Marcus Webb from Trident's transition team was having dinner with 2 other suits I didn't recognize. They were deep in conversation, reviewing documents on a tablet, occasionally toasting what was clearly the upcoming acquisition. Marcus had grilled me for hours during technical due diligence, calling my encryption framework the gold standard for enterprise security. In 29 hours, he'd be calling it something very different. I finished my salad, left a generous tip, and walked out without looking back. Let them all see Claire Donovan, defeated engineer, going quietly into the night. The thought of their faces tomorrow afternoon when the truth emerged was better than any wine I could have ordered. Back home, I pulled up Northbridge's stock price, trading at $73.40, up 2% on acquisition rumors. The market loved the Trident deal. Seeing it as validation of Northbridge's technology, analysts were predicting it would hit 85 after the acquisition closed. I took a screenshot, saving it to a folder labeled Before. My personal lawyer, David Steinberg, had called 3 times. I finally answered on the 4th attempt. Claire, I've reviewed the documents you sent. This is extraordinary. Are you certain about the timing? Down to the minute, I said. They'll try to fight it, claim you developed everything as work for hire, that the founder's clause is invalid. They can try, but Edward Lane's signature is on those documents, notarized and filed with the state, and I have 17 years of commit logs showing my personal development of every critical component. What about a settlement they'll offer you millions to license it back quietly? After 10:30 a.m. tomorrow, they're welcome to make any offer they like. Until then, I have nothing to say to them. David was quiet for a moment. You know this will destroy the acquisition. That's not my problem. I was terminated without cause 72 hours before vesting. The consequences of that decision belong to the people who made it. And if they claim you're doing this vindictively, that you're acting in bad faith. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I'm not doing anything, David. I'm simply allowing a legal contract to execute as written. If they wanted a different outcome, they should have read the documents before signing them. Or perhaps they shouldn't have let someone with no official position make personnel decisions about foundational technical staff. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because I was about to destroy Madeline Cross that was just collateral damage, but because Edward Lane's vision was about to be vindicated. He'd built the founder's clause to protect builders from exactly this kind of corporate stupidity. Tomorrow, his foresight would deliver a $220 million lesson in respecting the people who actually create value. 18 hours remaining, the countdown continued its relentless march toward 10:30 a.m., as indifferent to human drama as any algorithm I'd ever written. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes everything seem sharper, more real. 9:15 a.m., 1 hour and 15 minutes until the transfer. I made coffee, dark roast, and sat at my kitchen table watching the city wake up through my apartment window. Somewhere across town, Northbridge Technologies was conducting business as usual, oblivious to the ticking bomb in their foundation. At 9:45 a.m., the first crack appeared. My personal phone, the number only a few people had rang. Peter Grayson, the CFO. Claire, we need to talk. We have nothing to discuss. Peter? Please, I just found out about the timing of your termination. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. Interesting. Someone had finally done the math. What exactly wasn't supposed to happen? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. The vesting date. Jesus Christ. Claire, nobody checked the vesting date. Madeline said she'd handled all the details, that legal had signed off. Legal never saw it. Did they? Silence. Then, no, she said it was a routine termination. Standard package. Richard signed off based on her recommendation. And now? Now I'm staring at Section 12 of the Founder's documents that my assistant just put on my desk with a note that says, Urgent. Read immediately. Claire. Is this real? The IP transfer. You're the CFO. Peter, you tell me. I could hear papers rustling. Probably him reading the clause for the first time in his 5 years with the company. His breathing grew heavier. Holy shit, the entire encryption framework. Claire, this will kill the Trident deal. That sounds like a Northbridge problem. We can work this out. Whatever you want, stock options, a consulting contract. Hell, we'll give you Madeline's unofficial salary. I don't negotiate with people who aren't authorized to negotiate. And last I checked, Madeline Cross has no official position at Northbridge. Claire. I hung up. 10:05 a.m. 25 minutes remaining. My laptop showed multiple login attempts on my old company accounts. It was frantically trying to access my development repositories, probably attempting to copy everything before the transfer. Too late. The version control system I'd built had my personal signature embedded in every commit. They could copy the code, but they couldn't copy the ownership. Edward had insisted on that feature, calling it a digital DNA test for intellectual property. 10:15 a.m. The phone rang again. Richard Blackstone himself, calling from Tokyo where it was already past midnight. Claire, this is Richard. I'm calling to personally apologize for the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. I have a signed termination letter. Richard. Yes, but the timing was an error, an oversight. We want to rescind the termination, effective immediately. You can't rescind a termination 72 hours after it was executed. That's not how contracts work. We can if both parties agree. I don't agree. His voice took on an edge of desperation. The Trident deal is based on your representation that you own technology you're about to lose the rights to. I'd say you have bigger problems than my employment status. You vindictive bitch. He caught himself. I apologize. That was uncalled for. Claire, please. There are 3,000 employees at this company. The acquisition failure will trigger layoffs. Stock collapse. Then perhaps you shouldn't have let your girlfriend make personnel decisions about foundational technical staff. She's not that's not relevant. What do you want? Nothing. I want absolutely nothing from you or Northbridge. In 12 minutes, I'll own my work, as Edward Lane intended. What happens to your company after that is your problem. We'll sue. We'll claim coercion. Bad faith. Try it. Discovery will be fascinating. I'm sure the board would love to learn how Madeline Cross gained the authority to terminate employees. I'm sure your wife would find the details enlightening too. Silence. The kind that costs $220 million. 10:25 a.m., 5 minutes. A text message from Jennifer Martinez. It is losing their minds. They're saying the entire system will be legally compromised in 5 minutes. Is this really happening? I didn't reply. Another text. This one from Marcus Webb at Trident. My legal team just received a scheduling notice for an important email at 10:31. Should I be concerned? Still, I said nothing. 10:28 a.m. My laptop screen showed a new email in my inbox. From Madeline Cross, of all people. Subject line, urgent, please read. I opened it, curious what she could possibly say now. Claire, I know you hate me. I know you think I'm some stupid bimbo who doesn't understand your work, but I'm begging you, woman to woman, don't do this. It wasn't personal. It was just business. Richard needed to show the board he could cut costs before the acquisition. Your salary was the biggest line item in engineering. Please, I'll resign. I'll disappear. Just don't destroy everything. Woman to woman, she destroyed my career to save pennies on a billion-dollar deal. And now she wanted sisterhood. 10:29 a.m. I placed my finger over the enter key of my laptop. Not to do anything, everything was already automated, but to feel the moment. Somewhere. Lawyers were standing by. Executives were sweating. A $220 million deal was balanced on the edge of extinction. All because Madeline Cross thought she could play with forces she didn't understand. 10:30 a.m. The transfer executed. My scheduled email launched into the digital ether, racing toward Trident's legal department with mathematical precision. And just like that, I owned the heart of Northbridge Technologies. 10:31 a.m. The email landed in Trident's legal department inbox like a precision-guided missile. Within minutes, my phone exploded with calls. Richard Blackstone, Peter Grayson, numbers I didn't recognize, probably Northbridge's legal team. I let them all go to voicemail, watching the missed call count climb while I sipped my coffee. At 10:45 a.m., the first public sign appeared. Northbridge's stock price, which had been trading steadily at $73, suddenly dropped to 71, then 69, then 65. Someone knew. Someone was selling. By 11 a.m., Marcus Webb called from his personal cell. "Claire, I just finished an emergency conference call with my legal team. Is this documentation legitimate? Every word, every signature, every notarization. You're welcome to verify with the state's business records. You understand this kills the deal. I understand that Northbridge no longer owns the technology you're trying to acquire." Christ. A long pause. "We're pulling out. The announcement goes live at market close. That's your decision to make. You know what this means for them, don't you? The breakup fee alone. $50 million? Yes, I wrote the security protocols for that contract too." Marcus laughed, bitter and short. "You planned this." "No, Marcus. Madeline Cross planned this when she terminated me 72 hours before vesting. I simply declined to save them from their own decision." By noon, the Northbridge offices were in full crisis mode. Jennifer Martinez was texting me updates. Emergency all-hands meeting called. Richard flying back from Tokyo. Board members arriving. Security won't let Madeline into the building, she's screaming at the guards. That last detail was interesting. They'd already identified the source of the catastrophe and were trying to contain it. Too little, too late. At 12:30 p.m., CNBC broke the story. Breaking Trident Data Group withdraws from 220 melas. Acquisition of Northbridge Technologies, citing material misrepresentation of intellectual property ownership. Northbridge stock halted pending news. The financial press smelled blood. By 1 p.m., the story had evolved. Sources indicate key technology transfer to former employee may have triggered Northbridge Trident deal collapse. By 2 p.m., they had my name, Claire Donovan, former architect of Northbridge's encryption framework, claims ownership of critical IP. I finally answered my phone at 2:15 p.m. David Steinberg, my lawyer. "Claire, Northbridge's legal team is requesting an emergency meeting. They're offering $10 million for immediate transfer back of the IP. No. $20 million. No. They say they'll go up to $50 million. David, I don't think they understand. I don't want their money. I wanted my job, my bonus, and the respect I'd earned over 17 years. They chose to take all of that away to save $99,000. Now they're learning what that decision actually cost. So what do you want?" "Nothing. I have what I want, my work, legally recognized as mine. If Northbridge wants to license it, they can approach me with a professional proposal in writing, through proper channels. But I won't be extorted by panic, and I won't negotiate with anyone named Madeline Cross." At 3 p.m., the news got worse for Northbridge. The SEC announced a preliminary investigation into the company's disclosure practices regarding the Trident acquisition. Had they knowingly misrepresented their IP ownership, the stock, when trading resumed, had fallen to $42. Richard Blackstone called again at 3:30 p.m. "The board has fired Madeline," he said without preamble. "She's gone, permanently, no severance, no reference, potential legal action for acting without authority. She was never an employee. How can you fire someone who never worked for you?" Silence. Then, "You've made your point." "Have I?" Because from where I'm sitting, a CEO who lets his mistress make multi-million-dollar personnel decisions hasn't learned anything yet. The board is also reviewing my position. Now that was interesting. And I'm probably finished. Happy you've destroyed me. Destroyed Madeline. Potentially destroyed the entire company. I didn't destroy anyone. Richard, I was terminated on Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. Everything that's happened since is the natural consequence of that decision. You could have checked the vesting date. You could have consulted legal. You could have asked why your girlfriend was firing one of your foundational engineers. You did none of those things. We can still salvage this. Please, come back. Name your terms. I don't want to come back. I want to build something new. Something where engineers are valued, where builders are protected, where people like Madeline Cross can't destroy 17 years of work because they feel threatened. Then license us the framework. We'll pay whatever you ask. I'll consider proposals submitted through my attorney. But Richard, the rate just went up, significantly. By 4 p.m., the final casualty emerged. Madeline Cross, according to Jennifer's breathless texts, had been escorted from Richard's penthouse apartment by building security, her belongings in banker's boxes, her company car keys confiscated. Someone had photographed her in the lobby, mascara streaking her cheeks, her phone pressed to her ear as she presumably called anyone who might help her salvage something from the wreckage. At 4:45 p.m., 48 hours after my termination, Trident Data Group formally announced the acquisition's termination. The $50 million breakup fee was due immediately. Northbridge stock closed at $38, barely half its morning price. 3,000 employees watched their stock options evaporate. The board called an emergency session to discuss bankruptcy protection. Richard Blackstone submitted his resignation, effective immediately. And Madeline Cross. She vanished from LinkedIn, from social media, from the entire digital landscape she'd once used to project her borrowed power. All because she'd wanted to save $99,000 and prove she could make the hard decisions. As the sun set on Friday evening, I stood at my window, watching the city lights begin to twinkle. My laptop showed a simple message on the screen: Donovan's Lock Framework. Transfer complete. All rights reserved. The countdown had reached 0. The timer on my laptop screen blinked once and disappeared, replaced by a single document: Certificate of Intellectual Property Transfer, Donovan's Lock Framework. My name sat there in bold letters, not as an employee or architect or contributor, but as owner. Monday morning brought the epilogue. Northbridge never saw coming. The company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, unable to pay the $50 million breakup fee while simultaneously losing their core technology. The board appointed an emergency restructuring team whose first recommendation was brutal liquidation of assets. David Steinberg called me at 9 a.m. sharp. They're desperate. Claire, the restructuring team wants to license your framework for $5 million per year, renewable annually. $10 million, non-negotiable. And I wanted in writing that no one named Cross, Blackstone, or anyone romantically involved with company leadership can ever influence technical decisions. That's oddly specific. Just send it. They agreed within an hour. They had no choice. Without my framework, they couldn't even access their own client data legally. 3 months later, I read the final news about Madeline Cross. She'd attempted to launch a new consulting firm, Cross Strategic Solutions, but it folded within weeks. The tech world has a long memory, and everyone knew she was the woman who destroyed a billion-dollar company to save pocket change. Richard Blackstone moved to Montana, reportedly to reassess priorities. His wife had divorced him, taking half of his already diminished assets. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months later. I was presenting my new company, Fortress Dynamics, at a tech conference in San Francisco. We were launching next-generation encryption protocols, funded entirely by Northbridge's licensing fees. As I walked off stage, I passed a group of young engineers, fresh from college, eager and brilliant. "That's Claire Donovan," one whispered. "She's the one who proved the founder's clause could actually protect engineers. I heard she took down an entire company with a single email." "No," the third corrected. "She just let them take themselves down. She didn't do anything except know her contract." They were all right, in their own ways. I built Fortress Dynamics differently. Every engineer owned their code. Every builder was protected by ironclad contracts. And absolutely no one could make technical decisions without understanding technology. We grew slowly but deliberately, attracting the best talent who wanted to work somewhere their contributions were valued and protected. The famous USB drive, the empty one I'd left on my desk, became something of a legend. Jennifer Martinez told me later that Madeline had spent thousands of dollars having it analyzed, convinced it contained stolen secrets. The forensics team had to explain 3 times that it was completely blank, had always been blank, would always be blank. She'd refused to believe them, insisting there must be hidden partitions or encrypted sections. There were none. It was just a prop in a play where she'd cast herself as the villain without realizing it. Edward Lane would have loved the poetry of it all. His founder's clause, designed to protect builders from corporate predators, had worked exactly as intended, not through aggression or manipulation, but through simple, patient adherence to contracts that everyone had signed, but only one person had read. I kept his photograph on my new office wall, right next to the framed certificate of IP ownership. Visitors often asked about it, and I'd tell them the story of a man who believed builders deserved to own what they built. Some understood immediately. Others, usually the MBAs and consultants, looked confused. That told me everything I needed to know about whether they belonged at Fortress Dynamics. The Northbridge Technologies that survived was a shadow of its former self, a cautionary tale taught in business schools about the danger of unofficial power and the importance of understanding your own contracts. They still paid me $10 million every year, a reminder that one person's ego had cost them everything. Madeline Cross disappeared entirely. Some said she'd moved to Europe. Others claimed she'd married some hedge fund manager who didn't know her history. I didn't care enough to verify. She'd become what she'd always been, a footnote in someone else's story. As for me, I never looked back. The $99,000 bonus they'd tried to steal had transformed into $10 million per year in licensing fees. The job they'd taken had become my own company. The respect they'd denied me had become an industry-wide reputation as someone who couldn't be pushed around. I saved the final notification to my personal archive. Donovan's Lock Framework. Transfer complete. 5 words that cost $220 million. 5 words that proved Edward Lane right. The builders should own what they build. And sometimes, when corporate predators forget that truth, the builders remind them. The clock on my desk read 4:15 p.m. as I closed the certificate file for the last time. Justice, I learned, doesn't always come from fighting. Sometimes it comes from simply knowing your worth, reading your contracts, and letting other people's greed trigger the consequences they never bothered to understand. The countdown was over. The victory was complete, and somewhere, Edward Lane was smiling. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate revenge and poetic justice. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If you enjoyed Claire's journey of turning termination into triumph, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed corporate karma in action? What would you have done in Claire's position? Your stories and perspectives make this community amazing. Hit that subscribe button and let's discuss in the comments.